Hello everyone. Today's lesson is the complex sentence. Please take writing coach and turn to page 63. So the objectives of this lesson first is to understand the form of a complex sentence. How is it structured? Secondly, you should be able to differentiate between main and subordinate clauses. And finally, we will write a complex sentence or complex sentences to be more precise. So first, what is a complex sentence? A complex sentence consists of one main or independent clause. So sometimes you will be hearing me saying main clause, sometimes I will be maybe saying independent clause, it means the same. So this is one part. The second part of the complex sentence would be a subordinate clause. Also sometimes you'll be hearing me saying dependent clause. Alright, so a complex sentence consists of two things: main clause, subordinate clause. Alright? In a complex sentence, the main or independent clause contains a subject and a verb. And this is the most important point, can stand alone as a simple sentence. This is the main, it can stand. Whereas when we are talking about the subordinate, it cannot stand alone in a sentence. So the subordinate clause in a compound subject also contains a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone as a sentence. It cannot. That's why we call it subordinate, and that's why we call it dependent, because it depends on another sentence. Okay? So subordinate clauses can be adjectival clauses or adverbial clauses. Those clauses, types of clauses, we already studied them in our previous sessions. If you forgot them, make sure you just watch our recordings. So adjectival, for instance, James was curious about the person who left her bag in the restaurant. So here James was curious about the person. So this one is independent. This who left her bag in the restaurant, this is a subordinate clause. Precisely, it is an adjectival clause. An example for adverbial clause would be while he wondered what to do, comma, this is the adverbial clause, she came back in. This is the independent clause. So the one underlined in adjectival, which is adjectival clause, the underlined one, is subordinate, it's dependent. It cannot stand alone. Also, the same thing applies for adverbial, the one underlined. Also, it cannot stand alone. The sentences that are not underlined, they are independent, they are main clauses, so they can stand alone as a simple sentence or simple sentences in this case. The subordinate clause can appear at the beginning or end of a complex sentence, as in the examples above, or in the middle. Henry, who isn't very observant, didn't notice the bag at the table. So here, as you can see, it appears in the middle. Also, this one is a subordinate clause, so it can be at the beginning, middle, or end of a complex sentence. All right, now let's move to the practice. Practice A, differentiating between main and subordinate clauses, and this is one of the objectives of this lesson, to learn how to differentiate between the dependent and independent clauses. So we have to read the following complex sentences, then we have to underline the subordinate clause in each sentence. Only subordinate, we will not focus on the main. So basically, when we underline the subordinate clause, it means the other part that we did not underline is the main clause. For instance, Stacy packed her winter clothes away. So here, this is the independent clause, the main one. Whereas, because the weather had turned warm, this is the subordinate clause. And this is what we should underline, the subordinate clause only. So because the weather had turned warm, this cannot stand alone. The listener will be waiting for you to complete your sentence. If you started with because the weather had turned warm, the listener will be still waiting for an answer for you to complete what you're saying. But if you say Stacey packed her winter clothes away because the weather had turned warm, then this is a complete idea and it makes sense and it makes a complex sentence. So what we should do now, read the sentences, underline subordinate clauses, also we call them dependent clauses, alone, and then play the video and check your answers. All right, let's start. Number 1. Although he is bruised, he's okay. So I can simply say he's okay. It makes all sense, but I cannot say although he's bruised and stop there. It will not make sense. Number 2, I believe this one is easier. Which roosts in a tree? Here, the subordinate clause appears in the middle. Remember, it can appear at the beginning, middle, or in the end. We move to number 3. That had real feathers on it. This is adjectival clause. In other words, it is a subordinate clause. Number 4, when he got sick. Number 5, when her mother called her at school. Number 6, that would require a lot of research. Number 7, as soon as she woke up and ate breakfast. Number 8, who left the keys in the restroom. So those are the subordinate clauses, the dependent clauses. By the way, if we remove them, all the rest of the sentences will make sense. For example, number 2, the hens wake me up. It makes perfect sense. But we can never keep the subordinate clauses only, like in number 2, which roosts in a tree, and I thought that doesn't make sense. So this is just to differentiate between the main that can stand alone and the subordinate that cannot stand alone. Okay, I hope your answers were correct. Otherwise, make sure you correct your answers. We move to the second practice. So practice B, writing complex sentences, and this is the last objective of this lesson. We have to read each pair of sentences, then we have to rewrite them to form a single complex sentence. So, for instance, Rajiv made a mistake, period. He put the wrong ink in the printer. So here we have 2 simple sentences. We have to make them one. In other words, we have to rewrite them to create or form a single complex sentence. So the answer is Rajiv made a mistake when, look what we do. We add a subordinating conjunction. In this case, we are creating an adverbial clause. When he put the wrong ink in the printer. You see, this one, it was here considered a simple sentence. But as we added the subordinating conjunction when, we make this sentence a subordinate clause. We make it dependent clause. So basically, I removed the period from here and I turned this capital H into small one and I added when. Instead of the period, I remove it and I add when. That's all I did. Okay, so this is not the only way, by the way, of doing it, but this is one possibility. So what I want you to do, read the sentences, pause the video, read the sentences, try to do them, combine them to make complex sentences, then play the video and check the answers. All right, let's start. Number 1. Even though this is how I started, I had eaten enough already, comma, I accepted Loris's offer for another slice of pie. Look here what I did. This is the first sentence, the first simple sentence. Here it is, I had eaten enough already. And as I told you, this is one possibility. There are other possibilities as long as your sentence that you created makes sense. So when you start with the subordinate clause, make sure to put a comma. Okay, I accepted Loris's offer for another slice of pie, and here, of course, I need to replace the period with the comma since I started with the subordinate clause. All right, number 2. Glenn is traveling to New York City next summer. So I add so that, and I remove the period, and I turn the H into small case. He can visit his cousins there. Number 3. I could not see a thing in our front yard. So here we have the period. I change it. I remove it actually, and I add because the fog was extremely thick. Question number 4. When Callum called my house last weekend, again, when you start with a subordinate clause, make sure you add the comma with the first clause. With the subordinate clause, you end it with a comma when it is at the beginning of the sentence. My sister Vanessa answered the phone. So here, my sister Vanessa answered the phone is the independent clause. Finally, number 5. I will have to miss algebra on Thursday. So the period, I remove it, and I add a subordinate conjunction since I have a dentist appointment. So this is how I formed the single complex sentences. So as I said, answers will vary. Also, there are other possibilities. You can either start with the subordinating conjunctions. You can put them like the subordinating clauses. Sorry, you can start with the subordination clauses. You can put them in the middle or in the end. Just make sure they make perfect sense. Okay, so I hope that you understood the lesson. Should you have any questions, as usual, make sure to contact me. Have a lovely day. See you next time. Bye.